In the shadowed land of Umvuna, night had long devoured the sky. For 20 years, no dawn had broken across its mountains or its fields. The people no longer remembered the warmth of sunlight. Their world was ruled by the flicker of torches and the pale glow of moonstones mined from the earth. Every home was built close to a flame, every street lined with lanterns that sputtered and struggled to hold back the darkness that pressed on all sides. Children grew up believing that the sun was a myth, a story told by the elders who swore they had once seen golden light touch their faces. The darkness was no longer just absence. It was a presence, thick and alive, creeping through cracks and keyholes, whispering of fear and forgotten hope. Amara was born on the last morning the sun had risen. Her mother often told the story in hushed tones, how, as the final rays of dawn touched the hills, the baby in her arms opened her eyes and the light seemed to linger on her skin. That faint glow never left Amara. Even as she grew, when the torches dimmed or the fires went out, her skin shimmered like a reflection caught beneath deep water. The people called her the Dawn's Child, both in reverence and fear. Some said she was blessed by the lost gods. Others whispered that she had stolen the sun's spirit for herself. As she walked through the markets of Umvuna, heads would turn and eyes would lower. The torches around her burned steadier in her presence, their flames bending subtly toward her as though seeking comfort. Old women would touch her hand for luck, while guards would watch her from a distance, muttering about omens. Amara never asked for their awe or their suspicion. She only wished to understand why her light remained when all others had faded. The king of Umvuna, Malak the Blackheart, ruled from a fortress carved into the heart of a mountain where not even starlight reached. He believed the sun had abandoned the world because humanity had grown weak and disobedient. He fed on the fear of his people, claiming that only he could keep the darkness from devouring them completely. When news of Amara's glow reached him, his fury was cold and immediate. No mortal may hold the sun's gift while the king walks in shadow, he declared. He saw in her not hope, but a threat, a living challenge to his dominion of fear. His advisors urged caution, whispering that perhaps the girl's light was a sign, a path back to the dawn. But Malak's heart was long since twisted by envy of anything that shone. If she carries light, he said, then let her learn what true darkness feels like. His soldiers rode out that night, their armor reflecting the dim firelight like scales of black iron. The village where Amara lived was small and poor, a scatter of huts around a dying torch tower. When the soldiers arrived, their shadows fell over the people like a storm. Amara did not resist when they bound her wrists. The villagers cried and begged, but she simply looked toward the horizon, where she imagined the sun still slept beyond the clouds. Her mother clutched her arm and whispered, "You were born from light, my child. Even in darkness, remember who you are." The soldiers dragged her away before she could reply. As they marched her toward the capital, the torches they carried began to dim one by one, as though the night itself grew jealous of her faint, steady glow. When they reached the king's fortress, she was thrown into a cell deep beneath the mountain. There was no torch, no window, not even the faint gleam of the moonstones that lined the upper halls. The air was damp, thick with the scent of stone and rust. Chains clinked as they locked her wrists to the wall. The guard laughed cruelly, saying, "Let us see if your pretty light shines here, sun girl." Then the door slammed shut, and darkness swallowed everything. For a long moment there was nothing, only silence and the sound of her breathing. Then, slowly from the center of her chest, a soft radiance began to bloom. It was faint at first, like the memory of a candle, but it grew until her face and hands glowed with a warmth the cell had never known. The chains reflected the light like ripples on water. In that endless night, Amara's light did not die. Word spread through the dungeons that a prisoner glowed in the dark. Some said it was witchcraft, others a miracle. Even the guards, hardened men of the king's shadow, felt unease when her name was spoken. They whispered that perhaps she truly carried the sun's spirit, and if so, the darkness might not rule forever. But King Malak, sitting upon his throne of black stone, smiled when he heard their murmurs. "Let her light shine," he said. "The deeper she burns, the sooner her flame will die." And so, locked away from the world, Amara waited, her light soft but unwavering, her heart steady. She did not know that far above, in the villages of Umvuna, her faint glow could sometimes be seen in dreams, flickering beneath closed eyelids. The people began to whisper once more, not of the sun that had abandoned them, but of the girl who might one day bring it back. The cell where Amara was kept was unlike any other in the fortress. It had no torches, no slits in the wall for air or moonlight. The stones themselves seemed to drink in what little glow existed. The guards called it the Hollow, a place where men went mad from seeing nothing, hearing nothing, feeling nothing. Many who were locked there screamed until their voices broke, and when they stopped screaming, the silence devoured them. The king believed that if anything could extinguish her mysterious light, it would be this pit of shadows. When they dragged Amara down the winding steps, the air grew colder with every level. The final gate groaned open like the mouth of some sleeping beast. One guard, trembling, muttered, "Even fire dies here." The other glared at him and barked, "Then let her light die too." They pushed her into the darkness and slammed the iron door shut. The echo of the lock clanging into place rolled through the corridor like distant thunder, and then there was nothing. For a long time Amara lay still, feeling the stone beneath her palms. It was cold and slick like frozen breath. Her chains rattled softly whenever she moved. She blinked, but there was no difference between eyes open and eyes closed. It was a darkness so absolute it felt alive, pressing against her, crawling into her lungs, whispering that she was alone. At first she tried to fight it. She spoke her mother's name aloud, hoping to hear the comfort of her own voice. But the sound came back hollow, eaten by the walls. So she stopped speaking. She listened. Beneath the silence there was something, a faint hum, steady as a heartbeat. She pressed a hand to her chest and felt warmth there, a small thrum deep under her ribs. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. Time had no meaning underground. Her light, which once shimmered softly on her skin, now flickered like a heartbeat in rhythm with the warmth inside her. At first she thought it was fading, but she realized something different. It was growing inward, concentrating as if gathering strength. She could not see her hands, but she could feel them, outlined in a heat that pulsed gently through her veins. Then one night, or what she imagined was night, the air in her cell shifted. The darkness felt thicker, heavier. When she opened her eyes, faint shapes began to emerge in the void, silvery outlines like smoke given form. A woman bent with age carrying a basket of grain. A young boy chasing a rolling hoop. A man hammering metal at an anvil, sparks flickering like fireflies. They were not real, yet they moved with such clarity that Amara could almost hear the sounds of their lives. She realized slowly that they were memories. The walls of the fortress, the stones themselves, were heavy with echoes of the past. The spirits of those who had once lived, worked, or suffered here drifted in the blackness like embers caught in water. Amara watched them with awe, her fears slowly softening into understanding. The darkness was not empty, it was full. One figure stood apart from the rest. A young girl, barefoot, her hair braided with ribbons. She stared at Amara with eyes that shimmered like candlelight. "You are the light they fear," the girl said, though her lips never moved. Her voice came like a vibration through the air, as if spoken by the stone itself. "The king chained you because he thinks light and dark are enemies. But the truth hides where they meet." Amara's heart pounded. "What truth?" she whispered, though her words were soundless. The girl smiled faintly, her form flickering. "The darkness is not here to kill you. It is here to teach you to see." With that, the vision dissolved, leaving Amara trembling in the silence. She closed her eyes, though it no longer mattered, and focused on the pulse within her chest. The warmth spread outward, reaching her fingertips, her throat, her temples. The chains that bound her wrists shimmered faintly, catching echoes of her light. She pulled at them once, and though they held, she felt something shift, not the iron but the air around her. In the following days she began to explore the new sense that had awakened. When she closed her eyes she could feel the darkness breathing, moving, listening. She could trace the curves of her prison with her mind, feel where the cracks ran through the stone, where the rats scurried, where drops of water gathered and fell from the ceiling. And within that awareness she began to sense other things, soft ripples of pain, despair, and hope. The memories of those who had perished here called to her. Sometimes she saw flashes, a prisoner clutching his knees, whispering for forgiveness, a mother crying out her child's name, a soldier burying his face in his hands. Each vision left her heart heavier, yet each one also made her light grow stronger. She began to hum, not aloud but deep in her spirit, and the sound vibrated through the chamber. The walls seemed to hum back, carrying her energy through the stone like ripples in water. One evening she heard footsteps beyond the door. 2 guards stood outside, whispering nervously. "Have you heard it?" one asked. "Heard what?" the other muttered. "The hum. It comes from her cell. Like the mountain itself is singing." The second guard spat, but his voice trembled. "Stop talking nonsense. It's the wind." But they both fell silent when the sound deepened, soft, resonant, almost human. Inside the cell Amara smiled faintly. She did not know how she did it, but she had found something deeper than sight or sound, a connection to the darkness itself. It was no longer her enemy. It had become her ally, her mirror, her teacher. As she sat there, breathing slowly, the air began to shimmer again. Shadows gathered before her, shaping into a single figure, the girl from before, her eyes now brighter. "You see now," the spirit said. "The light you carry is not meant to escape the dark. It is meant to awaken it." Amara's pulse quickened. She understood at last. Light was never meant to banish darkness, but to reveal what lived within it. She touched the wall, and the stone felt warm beneath her fingers. The faintest glimmer spread from her hand, tracing the cracks like threads of gold. Above her, deep within the fortress, torches flickered without wind. Servants gasped as the flames along the corridor walls began to glow brighter, warmer, almost alive. And far below, in the prison of shadows, Amara sat still, her body surrounded by a soft, radiant glow that pulsed like a living heart. The darkness no longer swallowed her light. It reflected it. It had become the canvas upon which her spirit began to paint. At first, Amara thought the darkness was simply alive with memories, faint echoes that drifted in and out of her awareness. But as the days stretched into something beyond time, she began to realize the shadows were not just showing her the past, they were listening to her. Responding. Whispering in a language older than words. It began as a vibration, low and trembling, like a heartbeat in the stone walls. Then it deepened into something she could feel more than hear, pulses of sorrow, of anger, of longing. The air thickened with emotion until it seemed to breathe alongside her. The shadows no longer just moved, they spoke, though not in any human tongue. When Amara closed her eyes, visions bloomed behind her lids like firelit dreams. She saw the kingdom of Umvuna not as it was now, but as it once had been, bathed in golden sunlight. The people worked the fields, sang at dawn, and bowed before the great sun tree that glowed in the heart of the capital. The light was warm, generous, and alive. Yet as she watched, the image began to twist. The king, proud, draped in robes of gold, stood before the sun tree with a blade of obsidian in hand. At his feet, the priests knelt, faces hidden in shame. The king raised the blade and plunged it into the glowing trunk. The vision shuddered. The world darkened. The sun tree screamed, not a sound of agony, but a sound of despair so deep that even the stars seemed to vanish. Its light shattered into sparks that scattered across the heavens, leaving the kingdom wrapped in eternal night. Amara gasped, her breath trembling as the images faded. Her heart pounded. This isn't the gods," she whispered in her mind. It was him. The shadows rippled in agreement. They showed her more, the king's greed, his lust for immortality. He had bargained with the sun spirit, promising to protect the sacred flame that gave light to Umvuna. But when he demanded its power for himself, the spirit withdrew, retreating into the heart of the world and taking the sun with it. The priests, terrified of losing control, spread lies to the people, calling it divine punishment for disobedience. Amara sank to her knees, her palms pressed against the cold stone floor. The truth pressed into her chest like a weight, heavy but illuminating. She understood now why she had been born with light in her skin, why the night had never frightened her as it did others. She was the echo of what the king had destroyed, a fragment of the sun spirit's grace reborn in human form. The shadows stirred again, flowing toward her like ink in water. She could feel their touch, soft, almost tender, as if the darkness itself was bowing before her. Images poured through her. Mothers clutching starving children, farmers praying to a dead sky, torches burning low in desperate hands. The pain of the people flowed into her like molten gold. And beneath it all, a quiet yearning, a plea for light, not from the heavens but from within. Amara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. They suffer because of his sin, she thought. Because he betrayed the light he was meant to protect. Her chest began to glow faintly, the warmth spreading outward. It was not the wild flare of fire, it was steady, gentle, alive. The chains on her wrists caught the light and reflected it, tiny sparks dancing along the iron links. The darkness recoiled, then curved around her, folding in like a great, protective cloak. And then she heard it, a voice within the silence. It was not human. It was vast and radiant, yet soft enough to make her tremble. "Child of my last dawn," it said. "The night is not your prison. It is your womb. You were not sent here to be forgotten. You were sent here to remember." Amara's breath caught. "Who are you?" The voice was everywhere, in the air, in her bones, in the rhythm of her pulse. "I am what remains of the sun spirit. When the king pierced my heart, I scattered my light to protect it from his greed. A fragment of it lives in you. You are my continuation, my promise. Her body quaked with awe. Why me? Because you were born the day the light died, the spirit whispered. You are the bridge between darkness and dawn. The king's betrayal began the night, but your awakening will end it. The vision faded, and the warmth in her chest steadied. She could feel power flowing through her, ancient, sacred, patient. The shadows no longer felt suffocating. They pulsed with quiet energy, like the deep breath before a sunrise. Amara stood, lifting her chained hands toward the unseen ceiling. For the first time since her imprisonment, she did not feel afraid. She felt vast, connected, infinite. The darkness whispered again, but now it was different. No longer mournful but reverent. 1,000 voices of the unseen murmured her name. Amara. It rolled through the stones, through the air, through the pulse of the earth itself. She smiled softly. This isn't punishment, she murmured to the silence. It's preparation. And deep in the heart of Umvuna, where no sun had shone for 2 decades, a faint shimmer passed beneath the earth, a tremor of light so subtle that even the shadows seemed to pause, waiting. For in that moment, Amara's awakening had begun. You said. In the depths of the fortress, where even the echo of a whisper seemed to die, Amara sat chained to the stone floor. Her wrists bore the bruises of iron, her lips dry from silence, and yet her eyes, though the world could not see them, were alive with something ancient and restless. The guards had stopped checking on her weeks ago. They said the girl of light had gone mad, that the shadows now moved when she breathed. But they were wrong. She had never been more awake. Amara closed her eyes and let the last ember of fear fade. For the first time she did not resist the darkness, she embraced it. The cold stone beneath her feet became a pulse, faint but steady. She could feel it now, a heartbeat deep in the bones of the earth, echoing through her body. Slowly she began to match her breathing to that rhythm. Inhale, exhale. The stillness around her thickened, like velvet drawn close. And then, somewhere between one breath and the next, she felt it, the warmth. Not from fire, not from the torches long dead outside her cell, but from within her. A quiet thrum deep in her chest, like a heartbeat made of sunlight. It was soft at first, a flutter of warmth between her ribs, then it spread, gentle but unstoppable, filling her lungs, her fingertips, her mind. The darkness around her didn't fight it. It didn't shrink or hiss. Instead it swayed as if curious. The black walls shimmered faintly, like ink rippling in water. Amara's lips parted in a breath of wonder. The shadows were alive. They were listening. She let herself sink deeper into the rhythm, into that ancient pulse that was not just hers but belonged to all of Umvuna. She could feel them, the heartbeat of the sleeping forests, the sighs of rivers hidden beneath frozen soil, the slow turn of mountains waiting for light. Each pulse was a voice, each silence a prayer. The world had been holding its breath for 20 years and now, through her, it began to exhale. Her chest rose and fell, her breath glowing faintly in the air, thin threads of golden mist unraveling from her mouth. The warmth in her heart grew brighter, heavier, until it was no longer just light, it was a drumbeat. A steady, divine rhythm that filled the chamber. The soundless dark began to hum with energy. The chains around her rattled, trembling as though alive. The walls, rough and ancient, began to shimmer as if veins of sunlight had been hidden inside them all along, waiting for her touch. Every stone seemed to breathe in unison with her heartbeat. It was as though the fortress itself, the king's cold monument of control, was waking up from a long sleep. Amara felt tears slide down her cheeks. They weren't of sorrow, they were of recognition. For so long she had thought the darkness was her enemy. But now she understood, it had been protecting her, shaping her, preparing her. It had hidden her from the greed of men until she could carry the sun within herself. The air grew thick with light. It wasn't blinding, it was soft, pure and alive. Golden rays, delicate as silk, crept along the floor, tracing the outlines of her cell. Her chains melted quietly, turning into liquid light that soaked into her skin. She rose slowly, her feet bare against the stone, her eyes closed still, for she didn't need to see. When she finally opened them, they were no longer just human eyes. They glowed with the fire of dawn. The darkness around her bowed back like a living sea parting before her light. The cell that had swallowed torches for decades now breathed radiance. Somewhere above, in the blackened skies of Umvuna, a faint shimmer appeared beyond the clouds, a flicker of gold. The first glimmer in 20 years. And deep beneath the fortress, Amara stood, radiant and unafraid, her heart beating with the rhythm of creation itself. The light she carried was not to destroy the dark, but to remind it of what it once was, a cradle, not a tomb. The cave walls pulsed with her light, breathing in harmony. The darkness did not die, it became her companion, her canvas. Together they formed the first dawn. The night was silent, so silent that the world itself seemed to be holding its breath. Deep beneath the fortress, in the chamber where no torch had ever survived, Amara stood unmoving. Her eyes were half closed, her heart steady as the pulse of the earth. The light within her had grown. It was no longer a timid glow, it was alive, vast and ancient, as though the sun itself had taken shelter within her chest. 4 days, the darkness had lingered close to her, circling her like a tide drawn by the moon. It had stopped being her prison. It had become her companion, a being that whispered in motion, that hummed with memory. And now, for the first time, it began to move toward her with purpose. The shadows rippled across the walls, bending like kneeling figures before her light. She watched in awe as the darkness coiled around her wrists, not to bind, but to bless. It was gentle, soft, and strangely warm. The chains that had bruised her for so long began to hum with the same rhythm as her heart. The sound was faint at first, then louder, a low, trembling resonance that filled the cell. The metal links began to soften, glowing from within. The iron, once forged in cruelty, started to melt, not with fire but with light. Beads of molten radiance dripped soundlessly onto the floor, each drop a pulse of freedom. Her hands trembled as the last shackle dissolved into gold dust that vanished into the air. The silence deepened. The darkness that had watched her for so long now seemed to kneel. Its edges shimmered, like ink turning to starlight. Then, softly, reverently, it curved around her shoulders like a cloak. She could feel it breathing with her, shaping itself to her form. Amara raised her head. Her hair floated around her like strands of light woven into the fabric of night. Her skin glowed, but not like fire. It glowed like moonlight held within flesh, radiant yet calm. The shadows clung to her feet and arms, forming gentle patterns, like ancient markings of the sun spirit's chosen. She was no longer a prisoner. She was something beyond that, the child of both shadow and dawn. For the first time in 20 years, warmth spread through the stones of the fortress. The guards stationed above stirred uneasily. They felt the tremor beneath their boots, not the trembling of walls but of the world itself waking. Then it happened. A light unlike any flame bloomed beneath the earth. It pierced through cracks in the stone floors, threading through the corridors like veins of gold. The guards rushed to the stairwell, their torches useless before the brilliance rising from below. Amara took her first step toward the door. Each footfall sent ripples of light cascading along the ground. Her shadow did not follow her, it walked beside her, proud and alive. The air shimmered, the walls glowed faintly, and the chains that had once hung from the ceiling turned to dust. When she reached the iron gate at the edge of her cell, it melted before she could touch it. The light in her body did not destroy, it transformed. Rust became gold, cracks became streams of radiance. Every scar of her imprisonment turned into a mark of rebirth. As she emerged from the dungeon's mouth, the guards standing watch gasped. One dropped his sword. Another fell to his knees, his eyes wide, reflecting her light. She did not blind them, she illuminated them. Her brilliance was not the burning of fire, but the mercy of dawn after too long a night. The guards covered their faces, trembling not from pain but from awe. Amara stood at the threshold of the fortress. The night outside was still heavy, endless, suffocating, but before her presence, it began to thin. Wisps of light escaped her skin and floated upward, curling through the air like living fireflies. Her gaze lifted toward the blackened sky. For 2 decades, the people of Umvuna had not seen even the faintest shimmer of a star. But now one appeared, a single fragile spark above the fortress towers. Then another. And another. The darkness did not vanish, it bowed to her. The guards whispered her name. The light-bearer, one murmured. The daughter of the sun. Amara said nothing. Her voice was not needed, her silence spoke louder than any command. She raised her hand and the air around her pulsed. The fortress gates, locked for generations, swung open with a deep groan. Outside, the wind carried her light across the city. People awoke in their huts, blinking as golden rays seeped through the cracks in their walls. Children stirred, reaching out small hands toward the glow. And far away in his golden tower, the king stirred from restless dreams. For the first time in years, he felt warmth on his face, and it burned not his skin but his pride. He knew then that the girl he had cast into darkness had found a way to turn it into her crown. Back at the gate, Amara stood beneath the faintly glowing stars. Her body was a lantern carved from the night itself, the perfect union of what had been feared and what had been forgotten. She stepped forward, unchained, untouched, unstoppable. Behind her, the fortress began to crumble, not in ruin but in transformation. The stones glowed softly, reshaping into crystalline veins of light, as if even the earth itself wanted to follow her. And as she walked into the open night, her light spread, slow, patient, eternal, carrying with it the promise that dawn was no longer something to wait for. It was already here, walking among them. As Amara stepped beyond the gates of the fortress, the city of Umvuna trembled beneath her light. The torches that once lined the streets flickered, their flames shivering like frightened creatures. One by one they began to fade, not from wind or lack of oil but from reverence. Their duty was done, the true light had returned. The people poured out of their homes, their faces pale and stunned. For 20 years they had known only shadows. Now before their eyes, a soft golden hue began to paint the air. The night was no longer absolute. The darkness that had ruled their lives began to thin, turning into a deep blue shimmer that rippled like the sea. Above them, the first faint breath of dawn touched the horizon. Children gasped, clutching their mothers' hands. Old men wept silently, their wrinkled faces glowing with the reflection of a light they thought they would never see again. Amara walked slowly through the streets, her bare feet leaving faint trails of luminescence with each step. The air hummed softly around her, carrying warmth through the cold stone alleys. As she passed, wilted flowers began to bloom again. The frost that had lingered on rooftops for years melted into clear droplets that shimmered like tears. Word spread quickly through the capital: the light-bearer walks. Inside the palace, the king sat slumped on his throne, surrounded by trembling servants. His gold crown felt heavy on his brow, and for the first time, the flicker of the torches on the walls frightened him. Their flames bent away from him, leaning instead toward the window, toward her. When he heard the distant sound of thousands whispering her name, fear crawled into his bones. He stood, clutching his scepter, and shouted orders to seal the gates, but no one obeyed. His guards stared at the golden light spilling through the cracks of the door and fell to their knees. Amara's glow reached the palace long before she did. The marble floors began to soften and gleam as if infused with sunlight. The intricate murals of the sun spirit, long hidden beneath grime and shadow, shimmered back to life. The king stumbled backward as his riches betrayed him. The piles of gold beside his throne began to drip and melt like wax, running down the steps in streams of light. His power dissolved before his eyes. Outside, Amara ascended the final steps leading to the royal tower, the tallest point in Umvuna. The people gathered below, a sea of faces lifted toward her. None spoke. They didn't need to. The rhythm of their hearts beat as one, echoing her silent promise. When she reached the top, the wind greeted her like an old friend. Her hair swayed behind her, a cascade of radiant strands catching the dim starlight. The sky above was still veiled in thick clouds, heavy and unmoving. She closed her eyes and lifted her hands to the heavens. The world seemed to pause. For a breathless moment, all of Umvuna stood still. Even the air refused to stir. The silence that followed was deeper than any night, vast and eternal. And then, the light within her surged. It rose through her arms, spilling into the sky like molten gold. The clouds twisted and convulsed, their black folds splitting apart. A sound like a deep sigh rippled across the heavens. The people shielded their eyes as a single blinding beam broke through the clouds, pure, golden dawn. The light struck the tower, enveloping Amara in a radiance so bright it erased the shadows from every corner of the kingdom. The stars faded, the sky burned blue, and warmth swept across the land. The sun had returned. The people fell to their knees not in fear but in gratitude. Farmers watched as the earth drank the light and came alive again. Rivers glistened, fields sparkled, and the air filled with the scent of renewal. From his collapsing tower, the king cried out, reaching toward the light that refused him. His crown melted into his hands, and the stones of his palace crumbled like sand. The age of greed ended as the dawn consumed the darkness he had built. Amara stood at the peak, her arms still raised, her face serene. Her body shone brighter than the sun itself for one final moment, and then, gently, the radiance dimmed. Her form dissolved into the morning light, not vanishing but becoming one with it. The people looked to the rising sun and saw her shape flicker within it, calm, eternal, smiling. The warmth that spread across the land felt like her embrace. From that day on, the sun never failed to rise over Umvuna. And when storms came or nights grew long, the people would whisper her name, Amara, the Sunkeeper, born at dawn. They say that when a person stands in darkness and refuses to bow to fear, a soft warmth fills the air, a shimmer of unseen light that brushes the skin and soothes the heart. That warmth is her gift, her eternal promise. The Sunkeeper's blessing, a reminder that even in the deepest shadow, light remembers its way home. The first light in 20 years spread like fire through dry grass. At first, it was a fragile shimmer on the horizon, a timid gleam that kissed the mountaintops, and then, with a breath, it bloomed. The black sky tore open, and sunlight poured across Umvuna like a golden river. The land gasped beneath it. The endless frost melted, and the color returned to the earth. Everywhere, flowers awakened from their slumber. Petals burst through cracks in the stone streets, wild and brilliant, painting the kingdom in hues unseen for decades. Rivers that had run dull and sluggish began to sparkle, their surfaces catching the morning rays like liquid glass. Birds that had vanished from memory returned in great flocks, their cries rising into the sky like songs of resurrection. The people of Umvuna stumbled from their homes, shielding their eyes. Some screamed. Some fell to their knees and sobbed. Children laughed, chasing the light that danced across their faces. The warmth that touched their skin felt like something holy, a promise kept after years of silence. For the first time in their lives they saw their world bathed in color. And at the center of it all stood Amara. Her body gleamed softly, not with the harshness of fire but with the tenderness of morning. Her hair shimmered like molten gold, and her skin radiated a warmth that drew every gaze. As the sun climbed higher, her glow began to change. It no longer came from her, but through her. The people could see it. She was fading, her outlines softening into the air, her edges dissolving into light. She looked upon the crowd that had gathered, faces streaked with tears, hands clasped in awe. The young and the old, the broken and the brave, all of them gazed up at her as if she were the very dawn itself. Amara smiled, a gentle, knowing curve of her lips. Her voice, long silent and patient, rose once more, not as sound but as vibration, as warmth carried by the light itself. The people heard it in their hearts, not their ears. "The light you seek," she whispered, her words like wind through sunlit grass, "is already within you. You were never without it, you only forgot how to see." Her radiance pulsed, rippling through the city, washing over every person, every wall, every grain of soil. The warmth seeped into their hearts like breath after drowning. They could feel her, not as a goddess or savior, but as a spark rekindled inside their chests. And then, as the sun reached its zenith, Amara lifted her face to the sky. Her form scattered like dust made of gold. Tiny motes of light drifted down, settling onto the people's skin. Wherever the light touched, it left behind a glow, a faint reminder of her gift. The people raised their hands to catch the falling shimmer, weeping as it faded into them. They looked to the sky and saw a burst of light blossom across the heavens. The sun, whole and proud, burning with the same brilliance that once lived inside her. From that day forward, they named her the Sunkeeper, the one who returned the dawn and gave light back to the world. Every morning, when the first rays touched the kingdom, the people would whisper her name as a blessing. Farmers bowed to the sunrise before tending their fields. Mothers lifted their children to the golden horizon and said, "Remember her, for she taught us that even the darkest night ends when we carry light within." And high above, in the heart of the sun, they say her laughter still echoes, soft, endless and bright, the melody of a woman who became the dawn reborn. Generations passed, and the story of Amara became the heartbeat of Umvuna. The people no longer feared the night, for they knew what lived within it. When clouds veiled the sky or storms rumbled across the land, villagers would light candles on their windowsills, whispering prayers to the woman who had become their dawn. Each flickering flame was said to call her spirit closer, a quiet reminder that even behind the thickest clouds, the sun still burned bright. Children grew up hearing her name before they could even walk. Mothers would lift their little ones toward the morning light and say, "You are born of her glow." The Sunkeeper lives in every heartbeat that dares to rise after darkness. In schools, elders taught that Amara was not merely a savior but a reflection of what every soul could become. Light born from shadow, hope carved from despair. It was said that the glow she had left behind still shimmered in the eyes of certain children, those born during the solstice dawn. These children were called the Lightborn, and their laughter could brighten even the gloomiest days. When they smiled, their eyes seemed to carry a spark of gold, and the people would murmur, "The Sunkeeper walks among us once more." Every year, on the anniversary of her ascension, the kingdom celebrated the festival of first light. From the highest mountains to the deepest valleys, thousands of lanterns were released into the sky. They floated like stars returning home, their gentle radiance painting the heavens with memories of Amara's final dawn. The air would fill with songs, melodies that spoke of her courage, her sacrifice, and the love that turned darkness into day. In the great temple built where her prison once stood, a single flame burned eternally. It was called the Heart Fire, and no matter how fierce the storm, it never went out. Travelers from distant lands came to see it, and many swore that when they gazed into its glow, they saw a woman's silhouette, calm, radiant, smiling. But the truest devotion to the Sunkeeper was not found in temples or festivals. It lived quietly in the hearts of the people. When a mother comforted her crying child through the night, when a farmer shared his last loaf of bread, when a stranger offered warmth to another, they would say, "The Sunkeeper's light moves through us." And so, centuries after her body had turned to brilliance, Amara's story did not fade. It transformed, from legend to lesson, from myth to truth. The people of Umvuna no longer waited for miracles to come from the heavens. They understood that every act of kindness, every flame kindled in the dark, was the Sunkeeper reborn. When storms blackened the skies and fear tried to take hold, they would gather together, their candles trembling but unextinguished. The old and young alike would whisper her final words, passing them from lip to lip like sacred fire. "The light you seek is already within you." And on those nights, when the wind grew still and the candles flickered softly, it was said a golden warmth would sweep across the land, as if Amara herself had returned once more, walking among her people, her radiance hidden within every living heart.